Hello, hello everyone. Good afternoon. So hopefully everyone is enjoying your present day. So today I am going to tell you about the book A Passage to India, which is about around it is around 20th century novel that offer a more astute insight into the complex world of colonial India and the problematic relationships between rulers and the ruled. Then E.M. Forster's A Passage to India. His tale is attempted friendship between Indians and the British is at times funny, at times sad, but always full of respect for and a keen understanding of the two cultures that are poles apart. It is also a tale of disappointment and criticism as character after character abandons their attempts to bridge the gap between Orient and Occident. Considering this, you would be forgiven for thinking this novel to be a hard read and bleak beyond endurance, were it not for the fact that its author is a master craftsman of language and one of the finest writers in world literature. In Chandrapur, India, meeting takes place in the mosque. Dr. Aziz, a young Muslim doctor, is sitting on the veranda with his friend Muhammad Ali and his uncle Hamidullah. They are enjoying a water pipe together and engaging in a discussion about whether it's possible for Indians and British to be friends. During their conversation, Aziz receives an urgent message from his boss, Civil Journal Major Calendar, who asks him to come to Calendar's bungalow right away. Aziz sets off on his bicycle, but unfortunately, he encounters a flat tire along the way, causing a delay in his arrival. When Aziz finally reaches Calendar's bungalow, he is met with a disappointment as Calendar has already left, leaving Aziz feeling disrespected. Disheartened, Aziz begins his journey back home. On the way back, Aziz passes by a mosque and decides to enter, hoping to find some peace and solace within this wall. Inside the dimly lit mosque, he comes across an elderly woman. Upon realizing that she is English, Aziz becomes concerned that she may not be familiar with the local customs. In an unfortunate moment, Aziz emphatically shouts at the elderly English woman, instructing her to remove her shoes as is customary in Moscow. However, he immediately regrets his answers when he discovers that a woman, Miss Moray, had already removed her shoes. This encounter leads to a conversation during which Aziz learns that Mrs. Moray has recently arrived in India to visit her son, Ronnie Hisolp, who holds the position of city magistrate in Chandrapur. Mrs. Moray has also brought along a young British woman named Miss Quissett, who knows Ronnie from England, and they are considering the possibility of becoming engaged. Mrs. Moray and Miss Quested are both excited and curious about experiencing the new and exotic culture of India. They have a strong desire to get to know the real India. To fulfill their wish, Mr. Tolton, the city's collector, organizes a bridge party, bringing together both British and Indian individuals. However, the British party doesn't go as planned, as the two groups, Indian and British, remain distant from each other. They hesitate to interact and connect. The British and India guests at the party seem reluctant to engage with one another. In the refreshing contrast, Miss Quested and Mrs. Moray take the initiative to strike up conversation with some of the Indian women. Their friendly gestures surprise the Indians because they are accustomed to the British treating them with condescension or even contempt rather than genuine friendliness. Later, by conversing with Mr. Fielding, the head of the local government college, Miss Quester and Mrs. Moray expressed their frustration with the arrogance displayed by their fellow countrymen. Mr. Fielding appreciates their open-mindedness and welcomes them to his place for tea. During the conversation, they discuss Dr. Aziz, and Fielding suggests inviting the young doctor to join them, bridging the gap between the British and the Indian communities. Aziz is the first to arrive at Mr. Fielding's tea party, even though he and Fielding have never met before. Only having heard of each other, surprisingly, they hit it off right away, forming a good rapport. When Miss Custard and Mrs. Murray join them, Aziz becomes the center of attention, captivating the group with his stories about medicine and India. In the midst of the relaxed atmosphere, Aziz impulsively invites Miss Custard and Mrs. Murray to his home. However, he is taken aback when they accepted the invitation as he hadn't expected it to see seriously. To make matters worse, Aziz bungalow is not in a suitable state to host two British ladies. Shortly after, an elderly Brahmin named Professor Godbole arrives. Mr. Fielding takes Mrs. More on a tour of college, leaving Aziz, Miss Quested, and Godbole to chat. The conversation shifts towards the topic of Marabar caves, and Aziz suggests that they should visit the caves instead of coming to his house. Things take a turn worse when Ronnie, Mrs. Moore's sons, arrive to pick up his mother and Miss Quested. He completely ignores the two Indians, which deeply upsets Aziz. The pleasant mood that has prevailed earlier starts to deteriorate rapidly. After awkward and forced farewells, Ronnie and the two ladies depart, leaving behind a tense atmosphere at the tea party. In a car, Miss Quested and Mrs. Moray confront Ronnie about his behavior, accusing him of snobbery due to his treatment of Aziz and the Indians at the tea party. Ronnie in turn expresses frustration what he sees as their naivety. He drops off his mother and continues with Miss Quested to polo game. Once they are alone, Miss Quested gathers the courage to tell Ronnie that she no longer wishes to marry him. These news hurt him deeply, but he tries to conceal his feelings. They continued their awkward conversation until the Nahava Bahadur, a wealthy local dignity, arrives. In generous and hospital gesture, he offers to take Ronnie and Miss Quested for a drive in his new car. Seated together in the back seat of the car, Ronnie and Miss Quested start to grow again closer, and their hands touch accidentally. However, a sudden crash interrupts this movement as an animal runs onto the road, causing the driver to swerve and hit a tree. Thankfully, no one is injured, but the car requires repair. Fortunately, Miss Derek, a British woman, happens to pass by and offers Ronnie, Miss Quested, and Nawab Bahadur a lift back to town. Neither Ronnie nor Miss Quested wants the carefree and somewhat cynical Miss Derek, and their mutual dislike seems to them closer together. Back in Chandrapur, safe and sound, Miss Quested and Ronnie ultimately decide to proceed with their plans to marry after all. On the one evening at the club, Miss Quested casually mentions to Miss Derek her desire to visit the Malabar caves. She notes that Dr. Aziz seemed to have forgotten about their planned expedition. A servant overhears their comment, and eventually the news reaches Aziz. He realizes that he has unintentionally insulted the woman by not extending the invitation, and he's determined to make amends. Aziz goes to a great length to arrange the trip despite feeling somewhat reluctant himself. On the day of the excursions, neither the British women nor Aziz are particularly enthusiastic about the outing, but they set off nonetheless. Aziz is anxious about the potential for chaos, a common concern in India. When the two ladies arrive at Chandrapur station on time, there is no sign of Fielding and Professor Gorbole. However, the men, just as the train is leaving to station, Aziz already feeling that like the trip is a failure because distraught, but Mrs. More manages to calm him. After a short train ride, they reach the hills of Malabar. Aziz has arranged for a grand painted elephant to greet them, using all his connection to make it happen. The women and Aziz mount the elephant and head towards the first cave with servants and curious villagers following them. However, when Miss Quested and Mrs. More explore the first cave, they find it disappointing. It lacks any remarkable feature, and Aziz has nothing particularly interesting to say about it. As the group pauses for some refreshment, the conversations become more personal and everyone begins to relax. Miss Twisted seeks the advice from Aziz to how to avoid this snobbishness often seen in Anglo-Indian women. Her honesty and generous spirit touch Aziz, who assures her that she possesses a different and kinder character. When they enter the cave, the servants and villagers follow closely behind, overwhelming Miss Moray, the unpleasant order in the cave, the masses of people, and the terrifying causing her to panic. She emerges from the cave and adamantly refuses to enter any more caves. Aziz and Miss Quested decide to leave Miss Moray behind and explore the other caves together. They are accompanied by an Indian guide as they make their way to one of the main caves. During their co-op, Miss Quested becomes curious about Aziz's family and begins to ask about questions. At first, Aziz is happy to answer, but when she inquires whether he has multiple wives, he is deeply offended. In response, he retires in the entrance of a nearby cave to smoke a cigarette and collect himself. Unaware that she has upset Aziz, Miss Quested follows at a leisurely pace and eventually enters the cave herself. When Aziz re-emerges from his brief solitude, he finds that only guide and asks him which cave Miss Quested entered. The guide, however, can only point vaguely towards the numerous cave entrances. They call out her name, but there is no response. Aziz hears the sound of a cave arriving and notices Miss Quested talking to a passenger from a distance. Aziz then heads back toward the camp where he left Mrs. Moray and other servants. At the entrance of one of the caves, he spots Miss Quested's binoculars with a broken leather strap. He picks them up and continues down to the camp. To his delight, Fielding and Gorbole has arrived, having received a lift from Miss Derrick. However, neither Miss Derrick nor Miss Quested is present. Shortly after, Miss Derrick's chauffeur arrives and informs the group that the two ladies are on the way back to Chandrapur. Fielding becomes concerned and questions Aziz about how and why Miss Quested left. Aziz maintains that they parted on good terms and he had seen Miss Quested get into the car with Miss Derrick. Upon returning to Chandrapur, Aziz and Fielding are met by Police Inspector Mr. Hag, who informs Aziz that Miss Quested has accused him of sexually assaulting her in the cave. Fielding immediately goes to speak to the authority, but no one's success. District Superintendent of Police Mr. McDriddle explains that Miss Quested alleges that Aziz followed her into a cave and attempted to assault her. She claims to have defended herself with her field glasses, breaking the strap, and then managed to escape. The police discovered the broken field glasses in Aziz's pockets. News of the incident quickly spreads and British community is outraged. Only Fielding believes in Aziz's innocence, which earns the anger and condemnation of his fellow countrymen. For them, the incident reinforces their worst fears and prejudice. The mood becomes almost hysterical and accusations against Aziz grow more severe. During a club meeting, Major Calendar suggests that Aziz had meticulously planned the assault and even insinuates that Aziz may have bribed Borbole to ensure Fielding would be late for the train. Fielding, however, refuses to engage in the argument. The situation escalates when Ronnie arrives at the meeting. While everyone else stands in the show of solidarity, Fielding remains seated to express his belief in Aziz's innocence. This action angers Turton, who demands that Fielding apologize but is met with a refusal. Consequently, Turton instructs Fielding to leave the club. Fielding begins to strategize Aziz's defense with Hamidullah, Ahmad Ali, and the Nawab Bahadur. They enlist the services of the renowned anti-British barrister Amritraus to present Aziz in the case. Mrs. Moray returns with the Malabar case a different person, not showing signs of being ill-tempered and gloomy. She has her doubts with Aziz's guilt and is not convinced of his wrongdoing. Brownie, however, arranges for her secure a last-minute spot on the next steamer heading back to England, seemingly glad to have her leave. Miss Quested, on the other hand, is deeply shaken and emotionally disturbed by the events at the caves. She begins to question herself and her own perceptions. When she attempts to discuss her doubts with Ron, he rudely dismisses her concerns. In his eyes, Aziz's guilt is unquestionable and the case is crystal clear. Miss Quested, feeling weak and confused, lacks the strength to insist on a perspective or challenge Ronnie's conviction. The atmosphere in Chandrapur is highly charged as people gather to demonstrate in the front of the courthouse. The British residents prepare for the possibility of violence since Ronnie is directly involved in the case. The proceedings are led by the Indian Mr. Das. The British community is convinced that Das will rule in his favor since he is a subordinate to Ronnie. In the courtroom, the British and the Major Calendar at the forefront attempt to assert confront over the proceeding. However, to their surprise, Das does not cooperate with his efforts. After a period of tension and commotion, calm is eventually restored. Miss Fitz takes the stand to testify and she begins to recount her version of the events at the case. Her mind drifts back in the fateful day when Superintendent of Police Mr. McBrightly possessed the crucial question of whether Aziz followed her into the cave. She hesitated and eventually responds that he did not. To the astonishment of the British contingent, Miss Fitz clears that Aziz of the charge against him and withdraws her accusation. Riots erupt in Chandropa and Mrs. Pure who had been impartial and absent third party during the incident at the cave, becomes a legend among the Indians. She symbolizes the triumph and they celebrate her with cries of Mrs. Mrs. Ismore in the streets. However, among the British community, Miss Quested is ostracized because they feel she betrayed them. In search of refuge, Miss Quested turns to Fielding's college where he allows her to stay while he's away. Fielding has come to appreciate her stubbornness and honesty. He tries to convince Aziz to forgive Miss Quested and not seek damages from her. Their friendship begins to suffer, particularly when Aziz starts to believe rumors suggesting that Fielding and Miss Quested are having an affair. When the news of Mrs. Murray's death during her journey back to England reached the Indians, they view it as a punishment by the god for Ronnie's action. Rowney, however, suppresses his feelings of guilt and focuses on maintaining order in Chandrapur. A marriage between him and Miss Quested is completely off the table. Miss Quested eventually returns to England and shortly after Fielding also departs for England. Aziz convinces himself that Fielding has followed Miss Quested to England to marry her, and this encouragement for Aziz is not to claim damages against her was motivated by his agenda. 2 years pass, Aziz has given rise to the position of the chief doctor for the Maharaja of Manu. Thanks to his connection with Godbole, who is now serving as the Minister of Education in Mau. After Fielding's departure, Aziz made a firm decision to cut ties with the British in general and with Fielding in particular. He refuses to read or respond to Fielding's letters. However, when Fielding unexpectedly arrives in Mau one day, Aziz remains distant and aloof. Even when he learns that Fielding has married Mrs. Murray's daughter Stella instead of Miss Quested. Aziz does not impatiently soften. He still harbors resentment towards Fielding for his previous closeness to Miss Quested. Nonetheless, Aziz finds it difficult to maintain the attitude for long as they eventually return to their previous friendship and familiarity. However, Aziz's political beliefs have undergone a transformation and he now yearns for India's independence. He believes that only when India achieves independence can he and Fielding truly be friends again. Thank you. And next, so please keep commenting and tell me what other books you like to know for the summary. Any Magna, any comics is also appreciated.